One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
July 20th, 1969. The culmination of a decade-long effort to land a man on the moon and return him safely to the Earth. Countless hours of planning, designing and building the rockets, hardware and facilities to accomplish this Herculean task. This is the story, not of the rockets and hardware, but of the 3 launch facilities required to loft the massive Saturn rocket skyward. The story of the challenges, setbacks and triumphs that enabled men to walk on the moon, all chronicled in the NASA book Moonport.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish.
May 25th, 1961. President John F. Kennedy, in a speech to Congress, challenges the nation. Just 6 weeks earlier, the Soviet Union had successfully beaten the United States in the race to send the first man into space. Landing a man on the moon became not only an important scientific achievement, but a way to re-establish the US as the premier space-going nation. The program that would accomplish this, Project Apollo, was already well underway. But building the massive complex required for the Saturn V rocket would take some time, and smaller Saturn I rockets would be used first for the testing of components, procedures, and men. And the first launch pad to be built for this would be Launch Complex 34. By the time Apollo arrived at Cape Canaveral, Florida, the Air Force Base had already seen plenty of rocket launches, and there were more than a dozen existing launch pads spread along the Atlantic shore. Pads 15, 16, 19 and 20 were at the northern end of the established facilities and were used for the Titan program. And as with any rocket, they had seen their share of failures. A fully fueled Titan weighed 231,000 pounds. The Saturn I rocket would weigh 4 times that. An on-pad explosion could be catastrophic. Dr. Kurt Debus was the director of NASA's Launch Operations Center, which later became known as Kennedy Space Center. Here, he compares the size of the new boosters to the existing Mercury and Gemini manned launch vehicles.
This increase in size, which is approximately, as you can see, double the size of the former space configurations, had to be taken into consideration for the concept and the design of the launch facilities.
As with previous rockets, the Saturn I first stage would use RP-1 as fuel, but the eventual upper stages would use liquid hydrogen, and the explosive properties of a fully fueled rocket exploding on or near the pad were unknown. This, along with the increased size of the new rocket, meant that any of the existing pads on ICBM Row, as it was called, were not only too small, but they were too close together. An entirely new launch complex would be needed, and it would need to be bigger. The eventual pads built for the Saturn V rocket would be unlike any pad previously constructed, but LC-34 could have been mistaken for any of the other existing launch facilities. It may have been bigger and further away than the others, but it had the same basic layout.
In the center is a launch table. 360 meters away is a blockhouse, which is a launch control center or the nerve center of the operations. The most noticeable element is that of the service tower, which in servicing position straddles the space vehicle. The service tower is used to assemble, service and shelter the space vehicle during preparation of the rocket for launch. After its job is completed, it is moved under its own power approximately 182 meters back to a parking position.
The igloo-shaped blockhouse, 1,000 feet from the launch pedestal, consisted of 3 layers. An inner layer of reinforced concrete, 5 feet thick, a middle layer of earthfill, 7 to 14 feet in depth, and a final 4-inch thick layer of shotcrete. It could accommodate 130 people, and the windowless facility was equipped with periscopes to see outside. It was the first structure to be completed and was ready for use by July 1960. The other components of the launch complex would not be so easy, quick, or cheap. Like any other government program, past or present, there were budget difficulties. And to make matters worse, the design of the launch facility was being developed at the same time as it was being built, so changes were inevitable. One undecided item was the flame deflector. There was considerable debate about the design elements. Should it be 2-way or 4-way? Dry or water-cooled? And what should the angle be? Ultimately, a 2-way deflector was chosen so as not to block views of the launching rocket from the blockhouse periscope. And a water-cooled deflector would be too large and too expensive, with estimates of 10 times the cost of a dry version. But the angle of the deflector was equally important. If it was set at the wrong angle, a detached shockwave would form and choke the exhaust plume, creating dangerous conditions. Initially, based on tests, 80 degrees was chosen, and 2 deflectors were constructed with delivery set for November 1960. But further testing showed that a 60-degree slope would reduce the backflow even more. The new, improved deflectors were finally delivered to the launch site in April 1961. As the costs rose, decisions were made as to what equipment was needed at various stages of the launch schedule. The original plan called for an umbilical tower taller than the rocket itself, but construction was stopped at the 26-foot level when it was decided an aluminum mast, seen here under construction, would provide the necessary connections to the rocket for the first 2 launches. By February 1961, the concrete launch platform and the inverted U-shaped service structure towered over the launch site. Another challenge was the support and eventual release of the rocket from the pedestal. The support arms would have to be able to quickly retract just before launch, and the hold-down arms would have to hold the rocket on the launch pad for 3 seconds while the engines were brought up to full power.
The launcher at Cape Canaveral will have 4 retractable support arms and 4 hold-down arms. The support arms must be moved back quickly in order to allow takeoff clearance for the booster's tail shroud section. The retractable support arms are shown in this slow motion sequence, moving to the retract position 62 inches in 0.8 of a second. The hold-down arms then receive an electrical signal from the support arms to release the booster.
Finally, on June 5, 1961, Launch Complex 34 was dedicated as the largest launch facility in the free world. The first Saturn launch was less than 5 months away. On August 15th, the S-1 stage for the first flight of the Saturn program arrived by barge. It would be the only operational stage for the first mission and was erected by the service structure crane on August 20th, followed by the dummy upper stages. After thorough checkouts and testing, a launch date of October 27th was set. At 7:34 a.m., the service structure was rolled back to its parking area 600 feet from the launch pad. Finally, at 10:06 a.m.,
3, 2, 1. Ignition. All engines running. Thrust commit. Launch commit. Liftoff.
the 8 H-1 engines roared to life. The first Saturn rocket reached an altitude of 84 miles and fell into the ocean as planned. They had proven the systems and hardware needed to begin the Saturn program. Over the next year and a half, 3 more launches of the Saturn I would take place from Launch Complex 34. But even as it was being planned and built, another launch facility, even bigger than the first, was taking shape next door. And LC-37 would advance the techniques and hardware even further, refining what would be needed for even bigger pads, for the biggest rocket ever launched into space.